there's a Twitter thread that we're going to go through. We're going to spend most of our time there because it was really great. And it's incredible. It's written by a colleague of mine who spent 12 years growing the Motley Fool, which for anybody who doesn't know, they do like hundreds of millions of dollars a year. So if you're interested, he shared his top 9 growth hacks with like a whole bunch of data and stuff. So we're going to go through that. If you're interested in like the growth hacks that have been used to build a legitimate multi-$100 million newsletter, we're going to talk about it. But before we get there, we have at least 1 or 2 other things to talk about. One of which is your Twitter growth, dude. What the hell is going on?
I was like, where is he going with this? He's got something up his sleeve.
Dude, I feel like it's so a couple of funny things have happened recently. Like one, for anybody who's not following, anybody who's like left, that's not following Tim on Twitter, you're going to have to go follow him because his account is blowing up. We were racing until like this week when, what do you have right now? You're like 11, 12,000 followers, something like
almost
that?
Almost 12,000. Yeah, like 11,600, I think.
Yeah. So here's what happened. One of the guys I work with texted me this morning and he goes, oh, this was really cool. And he actually sent me your message where you're like, yo, I just realized you follow me. So Tim was having a conversation with somebody on Twitter and this guy is super legit. And Tim was just like, he just shouted him out. He's like, hey, I just realized you follow me. That's so cool. Like, thanks for the follow. And Tim's got way more followers. So this guy was like, this was really cool that Tim Stoddart like thought it was cool that I followed him. It's cool to just get that recognition. When he sent me the screenshot, I saw Tim's follower numbers and I'm like, holy shit, Tim has 11,000 followers. And the reason I knew that, I told my friend, I'm like, that's crazy. That's like more than 3,000 followers in the last week. The reason I know that is because Tim texts me and busts my chops every single week when his follower count grows like crazy. So he texted me, and I'll bring this home in a second, but he texted me Friday, and Friday he had, what was it, 8,600 or something.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and I texted him, I'm like, oh, wow, like, you blew by me. Congratulations. I'm going to catch up. Better watch you back. That kind of thing. So 8 to 11. Here's what I didn't know. I plugged your account into archive.org and looked at, they screenshotted your account Thursday, the day before, and you were at 6,000. So in the last week, you doubled your Twitter audience.
Yeah.
From like 6 to 12,000. And I think you owe the audience, I think you owe our listeners a little explanation as to how the hell you're doing it. And I'm going to steal it.
Yeah, but please do steal it. A couple of things there. First off, I cannot tell you how ridiculous it is to hear somebody that I look up to and admire, you and also the person that you're referring to, say like, oh my God, wow, this person followed me. Because like, you know what I mean? Like, I have no idea what I'm doing. So that's funny. Okay, here's really what has been working. Hype Fury, like I told you about. There was a thing Gary Vee said years and years ago that always made me go like, what the hell is he talking about? Where he talked about attention arbitrage. And when I think of the word arbitrage, I think like when I was basically on the poverty line, I was trying to get my life together. I used to go to the dollar store and I used to buy silverware at the dollar store, and then I would sell it on Craigslist for like double the price. And so I could make like 10 or 15 bucks or whatever. I'll just do it over and over again. I go to the dollar store and buy some shit and then just sell it on Craigslist for double the price and make a few bucks. And like, that's arbitrage, you know? And so I always thought like, what the hell are you talking about with arbitrage? And I get it now. So it's 2 things. It's like, be really ruthlessly like hunt retweets, basically. Great content isn't actually the thing that is doing good on Twitter. It's retweets, man. And so I've spent a lot of time on the Hype Fury thing, commenting with stuff and fishing for retweets. I don't really know how else to say it.
Can we dig just a little deeper on that for a second? When you say retweets are the thing that's doing good, do you mean you're finding stuff that you retweet and comment on, or you're trying to get other people to retweet your stuff because that's the key?
Get other people to retweet you. That is definitely the key. Yeah, 100%.
Have you found anything that's like any patterns so far that have made that? Because like for me, one thing that comes to mind would be like structuring the tweet in a way where it's kind of helpful for somebody else's friend. Like I think of this, I was actually just thinking about this morning. It's pretty common to write something, be like, hey, here, I'm going to help you, right? Which is great because people see it and they like it and then they move on. But people like to be seen as helpful or like experts in their own field. And so I think there could be some advantage to writing something that's positioned to help somebody else help somebody else. Like, hey, do you know somebody who's building a newsletter? Like, tell them this hack that is going to help them grow their list, or they'll love you if you tell them X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the patterns that come to my mind when I think of trying to get retweets. Have you found anything that's been helpful?
Well, not really. And the reason why is the second answer to the question. So like, as we've been doing this thing for the last month or so, I wrote an article a couple months back saying like, I'm going to build a media thing for myself. And I was going to take social media seriously. I was going to step out of the bat cave. This is what my friends always say about me. They say I live in a bat cave because I just like to be the guy in the background, like running the business and making the money. And
by the way, that's officially going to be the screen grab for this episode.
That's fine. Here. Look, I got Batman on my desk right next to me. He never leaves my side.
Sorry, I cut you off though. You were saying getting out of the bat cave.
But, and so like, yeah, it's been going cool. And I would get like 10 or 20 followers a day. And I would like DM some friends, be like, hey, can you retweet this for me? They'd be like, yeah, sure, no problem. And then they would send me something else to retweet. So there's like that arbitrage thing that I'm talking about where I understood it's not necessarily about like, hey, this person says the best stuff. It quite literally is like working with other people to get your message in front of other people very intentionally. And so, okay, I've been doing that well. But look, the virality is really what changed. And it was a thing I didn't put a whole lot of expectations on. There's a new feature in Hype Fury that is an automated DM thing, basically, where I took one of my blog posts. It was like the most clickbaity title I could think of. I wrote an article called How to Get Wealthy on the Internet, where you and I talked about like that step-by-step process from freelancer to agency to products to basically like a finance company, you know, because every company turns into a finance company at the end, you know, and I took that and I turned it into a PDF, and I spent some time just talking about my successes, because if you put numbers and dollar signs in a tweet, then like it always catches attention a little bit more. But really, I didn't think that much of it. Like I really didn't. I didn't think a whole lot of it. And I said, if you want to know how I did it, I'll send you the free guide. And all you have to do is type in send it in the comments. And that's like how you actually format it in Hype Fury. And so anytime somebody says the word send it, that's it, SEND space IT, Hype Fury will auto DM them a landing page I created. And then they sign up for the landing page and then they get the free guide. And it was like 85% this thing, you know? And so like, yeah, it's been cool that I've been chipping away at it. And like you and me are talking shit and having fun or whatever. But it's when the things go viral like that I totally didn't appreciate how effective that actually was. Because not only did I gain, I don't know what it was, I think I had like 5,000 followers or something. Now almost 10,000 followers. I gained 6,000 email addresses.
Which is wild. Yeah. And so you're saying the opt-in there for this download is what's driving most of those email signups, or are they landing somewhere on your site and just signing up for something else? Well,
it's evening out now. I'd say probably 4,000 of them were specifically from this landing page. And I know because on ConvertKit, I created a form specifically for this page. So there's a specific form that people are signing up for when I know that they're typing in the send it and they're getting DM'd the landing page on Twitter. But like what has also happened is in time, just the virality of it has increased the followers. And then all of a sudden over the last 4 days, I'm tweeting the same stuff I was tweeting the whole time. And now each one gets like 5 or 6 retweets because I don't know, I guess it's like social proof or whatever. Now all of a sudden, like I know more than I did 2 weeks ago, you know? But so, yeah, like it's been fun. It's been a whole lot of fun. Like it's fun and giddy and, you know, it's like kind of intoxicating, right? Where I'm talking to my wife. I'm like, babe, I got 11,000. And, it's been a good fucking time, but really getting serious for 1 second, it's all about the email addresses. Like that's really what it comes down to. And that's why I know it's been successful.
Yeah. Well, you know, what's interesting. I hadn't planned, first of all, congratulations. And
Yeah.
thanks for sharing those tips too. That's, I think, some interesting lessons people can look at. First, you gave a couple of tool tips. So, Hype Fury combined with ConvertKit and some kind of PDF download. So you can go take that. I think what you said is really important, turning that social audience into some kind of email list, something that's owned, because the reality is one thing that I've experienced is even a little consistency seems to do wonders for distribution on Twitter. I mean, this week I tweeted a couple of threads a couple of days in a row, and you see it you pretty much instantly is you see like the difference in the amount of engagement that those get. And that's great. But the downside is as soon as you don't make a thread in a day, like you lose a lot of traction on Twitter. So transforming that list into something,
feeding the beast, I call it.
Feeding the beast. And then I guess turning it into an email list is like feeding the beast or whatever.
Yeah,
like
I guess
slaying the beast.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting tip. You reminded me of something that I hadn't planned to talk about, but did you see that thread that I did on the travel influencer couple or ex couple?
Oh, yeah, we were going to talk about that guy.
Yeah, well, I don't have too much to say. People can check it out. Basically, I do these little case studies on Twitter from time to time of different media creators who are like making the model work. And I'm going to be doing a talk on the travel industry soon. So I'm just looking at different travel case studies. But there's this duo. I'll call them a duo. They used to be a couple. I don't think they are anymore. But they've got like 4 million Instagram followers between them. And what I thought was really interesting was we've laid out this model in the past before of how like the keys to success are cash flow first, then you build your audience, then you build your products. And traditionally, we've talked about those products as being like services or newsletters, things that, or like, yeah, basically newsletters or other digital products that you can sell on a subscription basis. What's interesting about this couple is, or this duo, is that they've got pretty much no email list. They've got about 4.5 million Instagram followers between the two of them, but they've not, I've kind of gone through their funnels a little bit. As far as I can tell, they're not really working super hard to turn those people into email subscribers. So that was kind of an interesting thing. But they are following the model that we laid out, but differently than we've laid it out because they've chosen different front and back end products. So they have this huge audience. Instead of on the inexpensive subscription side, instead of a newsletter, they're sending them to apps and like software, which I thought was interesting. We never really talked about that, but it is a potential option, especially if you're in the creative market. Like let's say, wouldn't just have to be apps. They sell camera presettings.
Nice.
And it just got me thinking about how like, oh, you could sell like Photoshop templates or whatever you want. But the thing that really interested me was the back-end product. So typically your back-end product's like your most expensive paid newsletter. For them, rather than an expensive newsletter, it's an Airbnb in Bali. And here was something that I thought was really interesting. They charge $750 a night in Bali. And you can pretty much rent a 3-bedroom house for like $700 a month in Bali.
Yeah.
If you go to Airbnb and you just search like houses in Bali, theirs is the first one that shows up. And it is like 2 to 5 times more expensive than anything else that I've seen so far. And that's just so interesting to me because I'm like trying to transfer that back to the US. And like, you know, in Austin, that would be something like charging $2,000 to $4,000 a night for a house in Austin. Just not because it's different than anything else that's out there, but because you have a huge Instagram following and people want to stay at your place. So I thought that was really interesting. And I guess kind of a precursor to tying it back in with what you said, where these guys are, I admire what they're doing. The house looks gorgeous. Would love to stay there sometime. But where I think they're going wrong is that they don't really seem to have any good funnel set up to turn any of that social media attention into an owned list. And in this case, I don't want to speak for their relationship, but like, you know, they've done YouTube posts about the fact that they broke up and stuff. I'm sure it was complicated to divvy up that business in the wake of the breakup, in part because of the fact that there is like no owned list anywhere, you know? So there may be, I'm not saying this is definitely true, but for either them or anybody else that kind of follows this model, you could run into a situation where because you don't own your audience, your business doesn't actually work without your partner. Whereas if they were both funneling those people through this system to an email list or an SMS list, then at least you could both take a copy of the list and go your separate ways, you know? So I totally get what you're saying about turning that audience into some kind of list and agree. And what it got me thinking about was I think more Instagram influencers should be doing like SMS. I don't know why these guys aren't. They're taking all these cool travel pictures all the time. SMS mostly sucks. For like most people, it sucks to get messages from brands. But it'd be cool to get text messages from like your travel buddy.
Yeah, because listen to because you can do SMS with an opt-in. Like, it sucks getting text messages from random stuff that you never signed up for. And it's always the same thing, like your life insurance, whatever, click this link. And even the link itself is like spam. You can tell just by looking at it, but it'd be totally different if, what are their names?
I actually forget now, but
we'll call them Jane and John.
Yeah.
And so it'd be totally different if all of a sudden you have Jane and John saved on your phone. And every time you get a text message from them, it says, hey, Jane and John sent you a text message. Do you want to see what it is? And so,
yeah,
I think that's really interesting. This is like a rabbit hole conversation. Maybe we'll talk about this a little bit ago, but I always thought the different personalities of like mediums were strange. Like, why is it that our inboxes are so personal and like we're offended if we get spammed on email? And like, why is it that we basically just throw out Instagram spam DMs as just like part of the thing? I always think that's really interesting. And I always wondered why text messages didn't become bigger, because it's so obvious, it's so instantaneous, and it's so connected to you all the time. But as a society, like, we just collectively decided that like, no, this is just for my friends. And that's probably a good thing. Like, who knows? It's just interesting to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you think about it, that's how email started. And I think it's almost like every time we get a new medium of communication, it starts off being super personal and then slowly slides to like people figure out how to use it for marketing. And it's kind of like we said, every company eventually becomes a finance company. Every company eventually
turns into a marketing platform.
Yeah. I think there are tools out there right now. Like, one is called Community, which is specifically for this. It's like
community.io, I think it is.
Yeah, something like that. And it's opt-in SMS marketing. And they've got like a cool platform that like allows you to manage messages to lots of people, and it's just easier to manage inbound. But the thing is, most people don't get it right, because they'll do SMS the way that they're trying to do email, or the way they're trying to like display ads on Facebook. And nothing, I think I'll go on the record and say this, nothing is going to alienate your audience faster than texting them something that they don't want to get.
For sure. Instant unsubscribe or delete, or I just block them. I don't even look at them anymore.
Yeah. But if you're like one of these Instagram influencers who's out there doing like travel or food or real estate or something like that, like if you got an interesting thing where you're curating really cool visuals on a regular basis, I think there's a huge opportunity to just put your number up there in your Instagram bio. People text it. They automatically get signed up for your community list. That's how that tool works. And then you've got phone numbers instead of email addresses, and you're not really right. Yeah.
That's really interesting. We should take that more seriously. We should talk about this in a full episode, because it'd be the same thing like you're getting a text from your friend. Like when my sister, I don't know, she taught a workout seminar this weekend in Philly, right outside the art museum. And she took a picture of it afterwards with all like the people that showed up for a class. And it's like, oh wow, look at this. Look what my sister did. Why wouldn't it be the same when John and Jane are in, who knows, like surfing in Bali or something? It's like, oh cool, look at what John and Jane just sent me. Yep. So yeah, I think you're right, man. We should look into that a little more.
Yeah. So, okay, we have a bunch of other stuff to talk about. I don't want to get too caught up in this, but there was one other thing that I wanted to discuss before we get into the tweet thing. And you actually, I liked your answer to this. I proposed this in Twitter, but you were like, fuck that.
What did I say?
I said I want to talk about the recession. And you said, let's not do the recession. Because I posed two things. I'm like, we could do the recession or we could do this tweet thread. And you're like, let's do the tweet thread, because the solution to the recession is to make money. And I thought, I like that. I like it a lot. But I still want to talk about the recession. And I'm going to tell you why. Because
is it a recession yet?
I don't know. I think technically it's a bear market. But I think a lot of people are probably worried about a recession.
Yeah.
And we've looked at this before. And you've probably, the last like '08 downturn was just a little bit ahead of my career. But I think it'd be really interesting to just kind of talk people through things that we've learned related to recessions and potential downturns that they may want to know in order to steer clear or give them the best chance of navigating this properly. So can I just ask you a quick question before
Sure.
we dig in? Like the last major downturn was '08. Were you running your company at that point, or where were you in your journey in like '08?
No, I was not. I founded it halfway through 2010, the end of 2010. I think it was November. It was November 2010. So
Got it.
right in the middle of the recession, because '08 was basically the entire year was a crash. And
Yeah.
the next 2 or 3 years, I think, was technically a recession.
Yeah. So I was a little ahead of me too. I think I started my web development agency in like 11. So I don't have a ton of experience on like what it really took to get through the recession, but we have looked at this in my company, and we looked at this back when COVID first hit, because when COVID hit, remember, everybody remember, like the stock market crashed like, what was it, 50% or something like that. So we were writing a whole bunch of things about like, well, here's how you survive this kind of crash. And here, what we did was we put out a form. We asked a whole bunch of people in our audience who said, hey, have you run your business through a recession? Would you be willing to share what you learned? And I wanted to just run through like one or two of the main things that I thought were most interesting in that, because the big point that I want people to like, do you agree with me that there probably are a lot of people who are thinking about this now, or am I over analyzing?
Oh, no, I think everybody's thinking about it.
Okay. Then let's go through this. Let's just talk about a couple of things that people should know. I think the biggest one is just that, like, yes, this is scary, but the recession does not have to mean the downturn of your business or the downfall of your business. And I think one of the most interesting things that we got inside this data was there was the crowd was basically split between people who saw their revenue go down and people who saw their revenue go up during the recession and then after the recession. And so we looked at some of the factors that like tied them all together. And I've got a couple we can talk about, but I think the big thing that I just wanted to put out there was like, if this is on your mind, if this is something that you're thinking about, yeah, it's spooky and it may sting, but there are things that you can do in order to like minimize your exposure and potentially even come out ahead. And I think that's important to talk about.
Let's hear them. I'm excited to hear these as well, because I have my own mentality on it, but you and I are very different in that way. You like data points. I'm more of just like a bash my head through the wall kind of guy. I see recessions and I think to myself, like, nobody is not going to spend money.
Right.
It's impossible. I see them as opposite. And COVID, in fact, was a really great example for us personally. And by the way, if you hear this and you think this is the total wrong thing to do, Tim, like you just got lucky, very well may be the case. I just can't help myself. Instantly, you saw everybody on every podcast and every single conversation was tighten up, cut expenses, survive. And I had a real conversation with my team. I was like, no fucking way. Like, the services aren't needed any less than they were 2 months ago. It's just a matter of positioning ourselves to take advantage of the fact that, I don't want to say take advantage of the fear. That sounds like predatory. It's not that. It's you're presenting a better option for people who still need to thrive and survive, as opposed to just like, hey, sorry, we can't help you. We're tight. We're buckling down the hatches or whatever it is. So yeah, I think I'm not excited by any means. I don't want to see anybody suffer. Like, of course not. And I would much rather the economy just continuously go up forever. Like, that sounds really awesome to me. But when I see these things, I actually don't feel too much fear. I feel very observant, because there's no such thing as like something getting siphoned away. It has to go somewhere else. And so it's just a matter of finding where that other thing is. Yeah.
I like that mindset. I think it's actually the right one too. One of the more interesting things that the data showed. So we asked people a bunch of questions. One was like, what happened to revenue for you? And then did it go up? Did it go down? Did it stay the same? And there were a bunch of other questions as well. What we found was there's actually a really strong correlation between people who took a defensive attitude and drop in revenue versus people who took an offensive attitude and increase in revenue. So I have the stats right here. Let's see. 47% of the people that implemented a defensive strategy reported that revenue went down a lot, with only 5% saying that it went up a lot. And meanwhile, if you kind of flip that around, among the people that chose an offensive or promotion-based strategy, only 13% compared to 47 reported that revenue went down a lot, while 30% saw dramatic increases in revenue either during or shortly following the recession. I think there's a lesson there related to what you just said, which
Me
is
too.
like, yeah,
It's amazing.
yeah, and I think what's really interesting about that is that doesn't even speak to strategy. It's mostly mindset.
Yeah.
Do you see this as an opportunity or like a catastrophe?
Yes. So I also want to be clear here a little bit because there's a difference. I think semantics are important in these kind of conversations. There's a difference between like tightening up and quote unquote sharpening your pencils than there is being a defensive mindset. For sure. Figure out shit that you're spending money on that you don't need to spend money on and stop spending that money right away. Like we did that. There was a whole bunch of software that was convenient and necessary, or excuse me, convenient and like cool to have, helpful. But we saved probably $350 a month the first day just on some of that stuff. So I think the phrase is like, sharpen your pencils. I don't know why that's the one that comes to mind, but that's different than taking a defensive strategy. And that mindset is so important because your mindset is going to dictate your decisions. And like it doesn't, you can even have like a bad mindset and still offensively make decisions. Because I don't understand why you would want to be defensive, because whether you're offensive or defensive, it actually doesn't matter because nobody's scoring goals against you, right? Like the playing field is the same for everybody. So there actually is no benefit to being defensive because that's not going to change. Like it's not a sporting event, right? Like you're not stopping anything from happening to you. The thing is happening regardless. So
Right.
it only makes sense to try to use it as a growth opportunity, especially while everybody else is using it as like a defensive mode, whatever the phrase is.
Definitely. Yeah, totally agree about that. And it can be tough because it's spooky. I think part of the mindset probably comes from just being through it enough. Another is probably having access to people who've been through it and like can recognize it as the opportunity it is. I mean, inside investing circles, you hear all the time, people who are really investors as opposed to speculators love this stuff because everything's on sale right now. That's what they always say. And that's sometimes it sucks to put it that way because when you say it's on sale, what it means is like people are losing their jobs and they're losing their businesses and all that kind of stuff. And it's true, but you need to square away how you're going to think about this situation in order to do like what you need to do to come out of it well. So I totally agree with you about the mindset. One other thing related, or I think maybe one or two other points related to this. So one really good strategy, at least as far as the data is concerned, was related to partnerships. What we saw was that 88% of the people who focused, let me just make sure I quote this properly. Of the companies that pursued strategic partnerships as a way of staying afloat, nearly all, 88%, saw revenue either increase or stay the same. So I'll say that one more time just to drive the point home. If you're trying to stay afloat, you really should be inspecting strategic partnerships as a potential avenue for your success and survival. Of the people who did that, most of them stayed afloat or saw their revenue even increase. And one of the examples that we have of this was a design company, it says Two Hounds Design, which I don't know what that is, but they partnered with dog trainers, veterinarians, and behaviorists in order to promote their product. So it sounds like maybe they do like leashes and harnesses and stuff. Pre-recession, their revenue was $300K, but by 2010, they were doing $1 million, and in 2012, they hit $2 million. So that was one. And then another company said that they created their own sort of internal referral network within the industry. And this was kind of interesting. I got a quote from them. They said, "It became necessary to trust some of my direct competitors for the larger community of professionals to remain intact. It fostered," and that ended up being a good thing. They would refer clients to each other. And he said it fostered higher all around quality and performance expectations. And ultimately our rates and our businesses increased slightly. So I don't know where the line is between that and what do they call it? Like price fixing. But, the point here is like, you're not an island when you go through these things. Reach out, talk to people in your community, whether they're tangential businesses or even other people who are doing the exact same thing as you, and like work together in order to pull through this. That's a strategy that's worked for a lot of people who've gone through these kinds of times. And you're big on
so
partnerships.
I'm very big on partnerships, and I found this concept of partnerships very, very fascinating with the supply chain shenanigans over the last 2 years, because I realized that there's pros and cons to everything. Like, what is the goal to these big companies? Like, you want to be completely vertically integrated, right? Maybe, because you lose so much flexibility, or excuse me, because you lose moldability, I should say. I think in a way being vertically integrated makes you more flexible, but it also at the same time makes you like, it's like you can't react quickly because like this is your system and you have to fix the system as opposed to like finding, it's like the difference between a Ferrari and a Honda Civic. You know, like everybody wants a Ferrari, but if your fucking like oil filter breaks on a Ferrari, you know, it's a nightmare. Whereas a Honda Civic, there's like 4 different kinds of oil filters you could probably put on, or at the very least, the oil filter that you need is the most common one. And so with partnerships, there's real pros and cons to them. And I like partnerships personally, and not saying that this is necessarily the right way to do it. It's just the way that vibes with my personality. I like partnerships because I like spending all of my time on growth. And if I can find other people to facilitate things that I either don't want to do or aren't as good at, then I would rather do that. And so, yeah, I think I have done that a few times, and some of those things that we talked about. But for the more like concrete example in terms of partnering maybe with competitors, I have very rarely found competitors that were such like enemies that it was impossible to find ways that we could help each other. In fact, I've never found that to be the case. Only one really, but we've never spoken to each other. And even still, I've never like gone out of my way to talk shit on them. Basically, we're rivals, we're competitors. And so I don't think there's any value with closing the doors to find mutually beneficial relationships. Like, why? What do you get out of it other than your ego?
Totally. I've always, or not always, I used to think that like very competitive attitude was the default of business. But then I learned that there's actually another option, which is that whole concept that like actually the pie is not finite. You can work together. When people work together in an industry, they grow the pie. In fact, Barry Nailbuff wrote a book about this, and it has something to do with that pie something. We'll link to it in the show notes. But the whole concept is that when you work together, it's not like you're divvying up the same amount. You are now deploying even more resources in order to grow the industry overall, so everybody benefits. And I think speaking of benefits and like working with competitors, I think that's the last thing I just wanted to mention related to this, because there's a really interesting opportunity in these downturns to grow your business. So we saw a couple of things happen. There were some people who invested in their clients during this time, right? Like they hustled to get by, and it was tough, but they really kept their clients first, and they would do things like offer discounts in order to help their clients out because their clients were struggling.
Yep.
Or offer even sometimes free services or free products, again, because they were trying to build a reputation and build goodwill inside of a community. They would do that, and then what happens is you win people who stay with you for a long time after the recession. If you can do it and pull through, there's one example of a company. I think they had, it might have been a salon, but he said our sales fell by 50%. We were down to like 350 grand a year at the worst point, and it was really, really tough. But we kept that focus and like offered discounts and free services. And I'm glad that we did, because we saw 20% year over year growth for the next decade coming out of the recession, which puts you way over the top of where you would have been. So it can be scary to watch that revenue fall 50% and think to yourself, this might be the end of the business. But if you can maintain that offensive strategy and really keep your customers first, this recession is going to end. They're not protracted. and you can come out ahead. I've seen lots of examples of this too.
Me too.
The flip side of that coin, I think, is the people who have enough on hand that they can actually go out and start shopping and buying. I'll say two things about this. So one is
I love this topic, by the way.
You love this topic?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into it. When it comes to strategic acquisitions, there's a couple options on the table. You can buy if somebody's going out of business, obviously you can buy their equipment for pennies on the dollar, right? So right there, depending on the kind of business that you run, right there's a really interesting opportunity to grow your capacity or get into new product lines just based on that. And, if they're liquidating, you are sort of helping them out through whatever that process is. But there's another thing to think about here too, which is that during these times, you can actually buy your competitors' market share. Yeah. And there's kind of like two interesting ways to think about this. One is straight up acquisition of the company, right? So you pay for it. But the other, this was something that Cody Sanchez talked about on My First Million, is that if you actually think about it right, you can do a strategic acquisition of a distressed business for zero money down in a way that actually helps out the founder. And it's not bullshit. It's this. So she had a friend who was running a bunch of gyms. And then during I think it was during COVID, obviously all the gyms were hit really hard. And so a whole bunch of gyms in this person's area were going out of business. And she's like, I feel bad for these people. I'm trying to help them out. I'm buying their equipment. I'm doing this. And Cody said, no, don't do that. What you want to do is you want to go to these people and say, hey, look, I know you're going through a really tough time. I can help you pull extra money out of this business that isn't currently there. What we're going to do is I'm going to acquire the business, zero money down. We're going to do it in a very thoughtful, very methodical way. We're going to transfer your clients to me so that they have a new home now, right? And then I'm going to give you a rev share on every single client that comes over. So that as you go, like for whatever it is, the next year or so. So here you have this person whose business is technically worth zero at this moment because they can't run it. You found a way to not only acquire and grow your own business, acquire their market share, but help them pull equity out that isn't currently on the table for them and doesn't cost you anything. It's kind of like this really interesting win-win-win all the way around the table. It would be better if they could just keep running their business, but the reality is a lot of businesses are not going to be able to make it through this. So that's a super interesting strategy that I think people should keep in mind, and it works really well for service companies.
Yeah, I love creative deals. I enjoy the process of deal making. What I love about it is the push and pull of both the scenarios you talked about. So again, there's plus sides and downsides to both of them. I think both are great examples. For Stodzy, what we did is the latter of the two during COVID. And this is why it worked for us. And you have to be really in B2B. It's only going to work in B2B because if you're in B2C, people are just like, their wallets are tighter, Okay, so the first example, make everything cheaper, delight your customers until they get through it, and then they're with you for life. Like, obviously that works. It always makes you think of that Warren Buffett quote. It was like, I've never seen a company go out of business that had millions of delighted customers. And it's just, like, sometimes we forget about it. Like, do the customers like buying your shit? Oh my God, they do. Like, awesome. Like, congrats. You have a successful business. And he said, that's the whole reason why he bought Coca-Cola. He's like, I can buy Coca-Cola and charge like a tenth of a penny more per can and just instantly come up on like tens of millions of dollars because I know that they have millions of delighted customers. So that always stuck with me. But I wouldn't necessarily think of this as being ruthless by any means. I would think of it as just ratcheting up. There's the flip side of it as well, where we positioned ourselves as, how do I say this? If you are like the best of the best, then you can afford to ratchet yourself up to have higher dollar clients. Again, this is very specific to service businesses, so this might not apply to everybody, especially if you have like a media brand. But the 80-20 rule is very, very apparent in service businesses. And so a lot of the last 5 years was us figuring out how to deal with this dilemma, which is how do you take the 20% of your clients that give you the most money and focus your time on them, while the 80% of your clients are the ones like nagging at, like pulling at your t-shirt all the time, because they're stressed out more. They're the ones that like, this has to work. This has to work. When's this going to go? When's it going to go? And our solution was it's a flat rate, and the rate climbs with everybody, so that way there's still going to be 80-20, just because there's personality types and different, like everybody's in a different position in their business, right? But the bell curve makes it as such that the majority of our clients are all basically in the same position. So when that started happening, and people started having those conversations with us, like we made the deliberate offensive choice to say, here's another company that could probably help you with this. Like this isn't going to work for us and where we are. I don't think we did anybody wrong by any means. Like we were very helpful with transitioning this, because the reality is like it wouldn't have been a good fit for them either to keep working with us. And so in the flip side of that coin, that actually turned into an opportunity for us to like ratchet our way up a little bit. And I think we probably do like $2,000 a month more per client just through that continuous like ratcheting service of like I don't know, just like cutting off all the fat cells on it, until eventually the whole entire mechanism turned into like really high dollar lean accounts.
Can we talk a little more about the mechanics of how you do that? Because I think this whole thing about raising prices is something that we've talked about a little bit, but it's hard for people to do. So I have a couple of questions. When you raise your prices, how much do you raise them by? Is it a percent that you typically, like you just have a flat percent that you say every time we raise them by this percent, and whoever stays and whoever goes? Or do you decide every single time how much you're going to raise them?
No, it's intentional. And you're going to love this because we talked about this before. Like you raise them in proportion to the amount that the return on the investment on you is going to be. And so we know exactly in our particular client or clientele, I should say, is unique because there's two different levels of care. Basically, there's public, which is like Medicare and Medicaid. Well, I would say three if you include cash pay in there as well. And then there's insurance, which is private insurance. And so we'll work with both. Like a Medicare and Medicaid facility is going to have a much lower budget, right? But it doesn't necessarily matter because the ratios are the same. So we know what it is that we have to generate in terms of like results on phone calls to make it so that the however many $1,000 a month they spend on us is going to be there. And so like there's a tipping point, right? I mean, I guess theoretically there isn't one because the more and more money inflates over the next coming decades, like the price will always go up. But there's going to be a tipping point where it's just not feasible for somebody to work with you when even if they decide to work with somebody that generates half the results, it's still going to be within their spectrum of return on investment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's like the foundation of how we did it. More specifically, how we did it is we just went up $500 a month until we couldn't anymore. And yeah, I mean, that was like how we did it, but we couldn't double. That wouldn't make sense. Like, so we did it incrementally, but you still have to do it in proportion to the results that you're generating. So you have to know, like, for this amount of money, we have to generate this much. And like, is that possible? Yes. Okay, well, let's do it. And then you kind of do it right up until the point where you go a little too far and you have to deal with like an angry email or two, and then you back off.
Okay. Couple other follow-ups. Let's use that $500 a month number. If I'm thinking through this for my agency and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to go up flat 500. What multiple of that would you recommend that I be driving for clients, like above and beyond what we agreed to beforehand? So like I'm saying I'm driving an extra $2,000 a month, or so I'm going to raise my prices 500. So 25% of the added value. Or would it be a different ratio of whatever the added value is? Like, how much more should I be driving than the 500%? Is there a hard and fast rule for that in your experience?
No. Well, maybe.
How'd you come up with 500?
Because we know that treatment center can afford like a $5,000 to $6,000 CPA. So they can actually afford to pay us much more because even if there's one more client that they generate from it, as long as it stays in a $5,000 to $6,000 CPA, their margins are still going to be, well, I guess it's technically 300%, three times. And then, like, of course, you have to account for treatment centers are expensive. Like, the facilities are expensive. You can't just hire random people. Like, they all have degrees. The billing is very expensive because the American healthcare system is basically a racket for insurance companies. Like, you know,
Sounds accurate.
yeah. But we didn't have like a ratio. I guess we've just been doing it for a while. The numbers are kind of baked into our heads, but we probably could push it further. But then we started hitting that thing where it's like the amount of phone calls that I have to have in order to close a client isn't actually worth the volume that you lose, you know? So I don't think there's a golden ratio to it. It probably was a little bit more of like a feel type deal, because at the same time, yeah, it's great to be able to close like a $40,000 a month client, but then all of a sudden, what you got six $40,000 a month clients, and you lose one of them, and you just lost a big chunk of your revenue. So it's a balancing act for sure. But $500, and by the way, we went up more than just $500.
Yeah, it
we
sounds
just
like
decided
it was for
that
several
was the
months in a
increment.
row.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's what I think. That's why I was curious, because I'm thinking to myself, okay, you're probably watching the amount of business that you're driving for them grow as you become like more effective month over month.
Yeah.
And so you know how much more business you're bringing them now than when they first started with you. And now you set this like incremental price that you're going to go up. And what I was trying to get at was, like, did you decide that the price was just going to be some fraction of what you knew you were already bringing them?
Yeah.
Or not? And it sounds like what you're saying is you know enough about how much they can pay for clients that you knew you were undercharging them. And so you just kind of knew what the tolerance was for increasing prices. And you just kind of did it. Okay, that's interesting. So there's a lesson there. What does the communication look like on that? Because like for me, when I was doing web dev, I for some period of time, I knew I was undercharging. And I got to the point where I was carrying too many clients because I was undercharging, and it just got to be kind of untenable. So I tripled my prices, and that was a very specific type of communication, but I only had to do it once. What did it look like when you were raising prices every single month? Did they know that up front when they came in the door, or was there like an email that you sent every single month? Did you just put it into the invoice and then
No. So yeah, maybe I'm not clear there. If I make a deal with a client and I say it's a certain amount, it's that amount until the contract expires. Yeah, I'm not going back on current clients to be like, hey, by the way, I know we agreed on this.
So this is like for new business.
Yeah, for new business.
Got it.
Exactly.
Okay.
But like, that's what I'm saying, because in these recessionary periods, when everybody is kind of holding on very, very tight, like, rich people are going to exist if the world collapses, you know? And like, it's just, there's the Pareto principle, which I feel like I've referred to so much, but this has been such like a big mental model in how I do business, where like the bigger you get, because it's like a monopoly, right? Like, everything starts with 8 players, but eventually, once there's like a 3-to-1 ratio, the person that has the 3 is basically more powerful than everybody else combined, you know? And so like, this became an opportunity for us to make it so that every new deal we had, we could afford to ratchet up, because the worst would happen is we didn't get the deal, you know? And so then like we would do that, and then it's like, okay, going forward, we're going to do this with every new deal. And then eventually over time, what happened is some of the long tail clients we had that we were basically like doing favors for would fall off, or we would say like, hey, we can't help you anymore with this if we would get overloaded, you know? And it's like, so like what we did do, we never increased the price on people, but we did tell people like, hey, look, this isn't going to work anymore. We can't take this deal anymore. We're happy to hand you off. So we did like remove clients from our workload, but and I guess maybe looking back, I could have had a conversation saying like, hey, like, you can stay with this, but it's going to cost this much. I don't know. I didn't feel, I would have felt weird to me. I'd rather just give them to somebody that can keep them where they're at.
Yeah, there's definitely a balancing point. And I think that's what happened with me too. So I, at the time, was working with probably like 5 or 6 different people who were like subcontracting to me. So, I would work different jobs for them at an hourly rate based on how they got them. So they always knew what price they could hire me at. And like I said, it got to be just a little bit, it was too much. I couldn't do a good enough job at all the work. And I wasn't making enough money at the same time. And so I basically just wrote this very transparent email that said, hey, I've loved working with all you guys. And I sent it to everybody. I said, I love working with all of you. I've gotten to the point where like this pricing isn't really tenable. And so for my sake, the sake of my business and the sake of all my clients, I'm going to be raising to X amount.
Nice.
And the reason I went with 3X is because I was like, I think half the people may not be able to make this work. And I said right in the email, I'm like, look, if this doesn't work, I totally understand. Like, we'll finish out any existing products or projects at this price, and then I will pass you off to somebody who I think is a good fit at this range. What ended up happening is that all of them, except for one, stayed. And so,
wow.
Yeah, so I just kept working crazy hours, but made way more money.
The money.
Yeah. And then the one guy who ended up leaving, he was super understanding too. He's like, you haven't been paying enough. You haven't been charging enough for a long time. And I think that was the message I was trying to get out there to anybody listening. It's like, if you are undercharging, your clients should know.
Everyone's undercharging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
you
your
guys
clients
are undercharging at Trends. I look at what you're doing. I'm like $300 for the year. What is this? Like, what are you guys doing? Triple it.
Thank you. This episode brought to you by Trends. We're not paying Tim to say that. It's a whole thing. We could talk about that forever. But I thank you very much. It's always nice to hear people say that. It's because it means that they like what we're doing.
It's hard.
It is. It can be hard to raise the price. It's harder. It's gotten harder just because we're inside of a bigger company. But in general, it's hard. And for people who are running their own business, I know it's hard. But I just wanted to put that out there and say, if you are undercharging to the point where you're like struggling to make ends meet, you got to raise your price. If you do it in a way that like is really transparent and honest and takes into account the fact that some customers can't stay with you for that, and you like kind of give them the plan for what the handoff is going to look like, they will be okay with it. If anybody gets super pissed off, you are better off without them. Even if it means that you got to skip a couple credit card payments or whatever it is. You don't need that in your life. And then the last thing I'll say is like, if you really like, a lot of your clients they know that you're undercharging and they will support you charging more because you're valuable to them,
Yeah. And hold on 1 second here though, because this is so important. Like, how much you charge is completely irrelevant. It really does not matter. It's what people get out of working with you is what matters. And so just do the math, because the numbers make life a whole lot easier. And they make, like, people are afraid of confrontation. And I am too, by the way. Like, sometimes people hear me talk and I get kind of chatty and like maybe I come across as overly confident because I'm like slightly arrogant, but I'm very, very, very reluctant of confrontation. My heart starts like pounding out of my chest. Like, sometimes I think that the person I'm having an argument with can hear my heart because it's like coming out of my throat. Like, I am not good with confrontation. And so why bother? It's very simple. It's like, hey, look, the work I'm doing is generating this much return for you. And it doesn't make sense that you're paying, that I'm generating like a 1000% return when I'm working all of these hours. And so everyone is undercharging except for the people that aren't. And those people aren't going to be in business much longer. And so, like, in a way, you're kind of helping your competitors by undercharging because they should be out. Like, they shouldn't survive. This is like it's
that's
business,
interesting.
So like, you have to get them out of there by leveling up.
I never thought of it that way. That's a really interesting.
Yeah, you're giving
framework.
them like fucking parasitic. They're like the fish that latch onto the shark. You know what I mean? Like, you want to be the shark. You don't want to be the fish lashing onto the shark. You want to be the guy that's saying like, this is my ocean. And so the guy or girl, by the way, sorry for that, is saying like, this is my spot, and do that by knowing what the value is that you're bringing. And once you do that, it's not about negotiation even. It's just about facts. And that's easy.
Okay. I feel like this turned into a masterclass of how to handle a recession. Hopefully something in there was useful. We know this is on everybody's minds right now.
Be offensive.
Yeah. And smart. If you have superfluous costs, this is not the time to be, wasting money, but you want to maintain that offensive attitude. look for opportunities to partner, look for opportunities to grow the pie, look for opportunities to acquire market share, and keep your customer first. And if you do that, not only will it help you continue to grow through and after the recession, but as Tim was saying, like that mindset is going to allow you to continue raising your prices almost regardless of what's happening inside the economy because you're driving.
Yeah. Can you repeat those? Do you remember what you just said? Because that was so well said. What the hell did we just come up with?
I can try and repeat them. I can try and repeat them, which is, be offensive, stay offensive, but smart, right? It's not the time to waste money. Look for opportunities to partner, look for opportunities to grow and to acquire new market share creatively. And then keep your customer front and center.
There it is. Yeah.
Keep your customer front and center. Whether that means maybe it means offering discounts. Like we did talk about that. We said there's situations in which you're going to help your customers out because you know, like what their pain points are. But really what it is you are going to deliver more value to them, than they're paying you no matter what. And so you kind of make those decisions based on, you figure out the math based on which direction you have to go. But as long as you keep the value equation in the right direction, there's a really good chance you're gonna do well inside of this.
It's a 100% chance. Yeah.
I love how that's the difference between us as podcasters. I'm always the one who's like, yeah, there's a pretty good percent chance. Like there's a pretty good correlation between these things, and you're always the one who's like, I don't want to say this is going to definitely work, but it's definitely going to work.
It will definitely work. And here's why. It's not about that. Like, okay, it's a 100% chance if you're in certain industries. This is tough in commoditized industries. Like the salon is a perfect example. You probably need to really work with your customers and just totally win them over. But if you're saying to somebody over and over again, you give me $50 and in return you'll get $100, there's a 100% chance that they'll keep giving you $50. In fact, they'll probably be like, oh man, you need $75? Fine, here's the $75, but they're going to give it to you. And so it's all about knowing what the metric in return is.
That's that dollar store arbitrage all over again, man.
Yeah.
All over again. Brought us full circle.
It really did. Shit.
All right. What do you think? We obviously can't cover the whole Twitter thread now.
Yeah.
But I was thinking, yeah, it's too late. We could either save it for next week or we could each pick our one favorite hack from his thread and just you have 1 or 2 minutes to say what you think. What do you think?
Let's save it for next week and let's just fully commit that the whole episode is this guy's Twitter thread. Because in all seriousness though, I put it on my newsletter today. It was great and enjoyable and quote unquote valuable, but it was so the shit that I like. Do this in this exact way, and this is what you can expect. And it was really masterful. I'm excited to get more from him. So I'm committed if you're committed.
We'll do it next week. We're going to give everybody here a homework assignment for the first time ever, which is we'll include the tweet in the show notes.
Cool.
Go check it out. And we're going to devote the entire next episode to talking through it. I'm going to look up a whole bunch of interesting additional material. And so if you check this thing out and you have questions about it, I work with Jordan. So you can shoot me questions and I'll ask him and we'll bring a whole bunch of information here next week. We might even be able to get him on. I can't commit to that because he's a busy dude, but we could even try and get him on.
I think we could get him on. I've been chit-chatting with him on Twitter all day.
Yeah. If you're listening to this and you check out this tweet and you want Jordan on the podcast, tweet at him and tell him to come here. And,
yeah, great
seriously,
idea.
He'll be happy to hear from you because he's just getting into the whole Twitter thing. And that'll help us gauge whether or not he's going to come on. We're not going to talk to him. I'm not going to talk to him. We need you to go say, Jordan, you should go be on the Copy Blogger podcast and talk through that amazing thread that you did. And if he approaches me, we'll invite him on.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. We'll cheat a little bit though. We'll send an email to all of the listeners saying hey, by the way, do you want this guy on? So we'll cheat a little bit, but I won't talk to him if you won't.
You guys got to do it for us. You be the ones to decide. If you want him, go let him know. And like I said, I work with him, so he knows how to find us. Bother him every day. All right, guys. Thanks for listening to this. Good luck out there.
This was fun.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Later. We'll talk to you next week.